"You're fired, Kayla. Leave your coat and badge. Now." The hospital lobby fell quiet like a snapped heartbeat. The kind of silence that made even the machines in the ER pause. People turned, patients, doctors, janitors, visitors, each of them stunned, eyes drawn toward the tall man in the crisp suit who had just delivered the sentence. There she stood, Kayla Thompson, just 22, the youngest nurse in the hospital's high-pressure residency program. Her eyes didn't show fear, just confusion. Her brown skin flushed from a grueling night shift, her white coat stained with effort, and now all of it stripped away in one public display. And the man shouting? Harold Whitmore, the hospital's CEO, powerful, rich, and ruthless. His glasses never slipped down his nose, and neither did his mask of control, except now he was red with performance rage. Not real anger, but the kind people use to make a statement, to remind others who's in charge. "Violation of hospital policy," he snapped. "You used medical resources without clearance. No authorization, no documentation. For who? Some nameless street bum with no ID, no papers, and no insurance?" Nobody moved. No one spoke. Tiffany Blake, the night receptionist, stood smugly behind the front desk, chewing her gum a little louder, her arms crossed like she had been waiting for this moment. Kayla didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't explain herself. She just whispered, "I saved a life." That life, as it turned out, had no insurance, no wallet, and had walked into the emergency ward drenched in blood, collapsing with barely enough breath to say, "Please help." But what he lacked in paperwork, he made up for in value, a truth Kayla didn't know yet. At that moment, 2 security guards approached. One of them, Jordan Wells, had once greeted her every morning with a friendly nod. Now, he looked at the floor, ashamed, as if carrying out an order he didn't believe in. Kayla unbuttoned her coat slowly, the same one she'd worn with pride, the same one she dreamt of wearing since the day her mother passed away without getting the care she needed. She laid the coat down gently, along with her badge. Then, without a word, she walked away. No one followed. No one clapped. No one even asked why. But what if they had? What if someone had paused to ask what happened the night before? What if they knew that just hours earlier, Kayla had ignored the rules to save a man who had been bleeding out on the ER floor while others stood by? That night, around 11 p.m., Kayla had been finishing her last chart. The hospital was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that usually comes before something goes wrong. And then the doors opened. A man staggered in, shirt soaked in blood, face bruised, arms trembling. He stumbled 2 steps and collapsed. The sound of his head hitting the floor echoed louder than the alarms. No one moved. Tiffany Blake didn't even stand up. "No ID? No treatment," she said without looking up from her phone. Kayla froze for just a second. Her mind screamed, "This man's going to die!" And she ran, hands steady, thoughts fast. She knelt beside the man, weak pulse, swollen abdomen, head trauma, internal bleeding likely. "He's going to code," she yelled. "Don't touch him," Tiffany screamed. "You don't have permission." But Kayla didn't stop. She pressed his chest. She shouted for equipment. She called for Dr. Martinez. One of the nurses, Naomi, hesitated. "I don't want to get reported." Kayla didn't flinch. "Then let me do it alone. But if he dies, it's on all of us." That snapped Naomi into motion. They worked fast. 4th line. Oxygen, emergency clearance. And within minutes, the ER team came alive. They saved him. No one knew his name, but Kayla had saved him. At 4 a.m., she left the hospital. She was exhausted, bloody, broken, but quietly proud. By 7 a.m., she was being fired in front of the entire hospital. But Kayla never guessed that the man she'd saved wasn't just anyone. He wasn't a homeless nobody. He was Vincent Langston, one of the richest men in America, CEO of Langston Medical Group, the private healthcare empire that practically owned half the hospitals on the East Coast. And Kayla? She was about to become the center of a battle that would shake the entire system. Want to know what happened next? Keep watching. But before we continue, don't forget to hit the like button if you're moved by this story. Share it with someone who still believes in doing the right thing. and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and courage. Because sometimes, it only takes one person to change everything. Kayla didn't sleep that morning. Not after being dragged out of the hospital like a criminal. Not after giving everything she had, only to be told she didn't belong. She sat at her small kitchen table staring at the wall. Her white coat was still folded on the counter, untouched since she dropped it at reception. That's when her phone rang. 4 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Kayla Thompson?" The voice was calm, clear, with the kind of seriousness that cuts through confusion. "Yes," she replied, unsure. "My name is Elijah Reynolds. I'm a senior partner at Reynolds and Rayner LLP. We represent Mr. Vincent Langston. We need to meet. Immediately." Kayla blinked. "I don't know who—" "You saved him last night." The air left her lungs. "The man you saved," Elijah continued, "is not just any man. He's the CEO of Langston Medical Group, and because of what you did, things are about to change." Kayla stood up from the table. Her legs felt weak. She looked outside at her street, just cracked sidewalks and faded stop signs. Nothing about her life looked extraordinary. But that call changed everything. Within the hour, she was sitting in a glass-walled cafe in downtown Manhattan. She didn't belong there. At least that's how she felt. Everyone around her wore suits and gold watches. She still wore her jeans and sneakers. Then Elijah appeared, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s, clean-cut, precise, but not arrogant. He smiled gently and motioned for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this morning was hard." Kayla just nodded. Elijah slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a photo. It was him, the man from last night, standing next to the President of the United States at a healthcare summit. "Vincent Langston," Elijah said, "and if it weren't for you, he would have died right there on the floor of St. Bradford." Kayla couldn't breathe. She hadn't saved him for who he was. She didn't even know. She had only done what felt right. "There's more," Elijah said, pulling out a thin folder. "Vincent remembers everything. Being ignored, bleeding out on the floor, you shouting for help, the receptionist sitting still." Kayla didn't interrupt. "Vincent doesn't want to sue the hospital," Elijah continued. "He wants to expose them, but he needs you. He needs your story, because without it, the system will just bury the truth like it always does." Kayla felt her throat tighten. "They're going to call me a liar, a lawbreaker." "That's why we're here," Elijah said firmly. "We have footage, audio, data, and now we have you." Then he looked her straight in the eyes. "Are you ready to fight not just for yourself, but for every patient who was turned away? For every nurse who was told to stay silent? For your mother?" The mention of her mother hit hard. Kayla remembered the long nights, the cancer diagnosis, the hospital that turned her mother away for lacking insurance, the waiting rooms, the hopelessness, the funeral that shouldn't have happened so soon. "Yes," she whispered. "Good," Elijah said, "because we're not just fighting a bad hospital. We're pulling apart an entire machine built on discrimination and profit." At that same moment, inside the slick boardrooms of St. Bradford Hospital, Whitmore stood proud, smiling, sipping wine in his high-rise office. He had already bragged to the board, "We fired the troublemaker." Now we're back in control. He didn't know his arrogance was being recorded. Not just his words, but the system itself. Jordan, the head of security, had access to everything. Footage, audio, internal emails, and for the first time in a long time, he felt sick. He played a clip again. Whitmore's voice crackled over the speakers. "That little black girl? I've been waiting for a reason to fire her." Jordan clenched his fists. He remembered his mother, also a nurse, who had lost her job for calling out the same thing. Racism dressed up as policy, cruelty disguised as professionalism. Jordan copied the footage onto a private drive. Then he wrote a short message. "To Elijah Reynolds, subject, evidence. I have what you need," and he hit send. Across the city, the pieces were starting to move. Doctors who had once stayed silent were beginning to talk. Nurses who had resigned were sending messages. And Kayla? She was becoming the symbol they all needed. Not because she had power, but because she had courage when no one else did. If this story is hitting you in the heart, don't scroll away. Like this video. Share it. Drop a comment if you believe that doing the right thing should never cost someone their future. This is just the beginning. In the next part, the storm begins, and the empire starts to crumble. The next morning, Kayla woke up to a world she didn't recognize. Her name was trending. Her face was on the morning news. Every headline read the same. Young nurse fired for saving billionaire CEO. Public demands justice. She opened her phone, overwhelmed by messages. Some from old classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. Others from complete strangers thanking her for standing up when the system stayed silent. One message stood out. "We saw you. We believe you. You're not alone." The Black Nurses Association. Kayla didn't know it yet, but across the country, hospitals were whispering. Administrators were holding emergency meetings. PR teams were drafting statements, because suddenly, she wasn't just a nurse, she was a mirror. A mirror showing everything wrong with a system that punished compassion and protected power. Meanwhile, at St. Bradford, things were falling apart faster than anyone expected. Security Officer Jordan, who had secretly sent the audio recordings, walked into Whitmore's office. Calm, confident. "You're done," he said simply. Whitmore laughed. "You don't have the guts." Jordan pulled out a flash drive and dropped it on the desk. "The board has this, the media has this, and by the time you check your email, so will every medical ethics board in the state." Whitmore's smirk dropped. Fast. "You backed the wrong man," Jordan added. "And now you're going to lose everything." Back at Kayla's apartment, Elijah arrived with a full legal team. They weren't wearing suits to impress. They were wearing them for war. "We're filing wrongful termination, racial discrimination, and patient neglect," he said, sliding documents across her kitchen table. "And Langston Medical is backing it all." Kayla was stunned. "Vincent, really?" "He hasn't spoken publicly yet," Elijah nodded. "But trust me, he's watching everything." That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Kayla stood before a packed press conference outside the hospital gates. Microphones everywhere, cameras flashing. She stood with her head high, wearing a simple white coat someone had gifted her. On it, in black marker, were the words, "Nurse, not criminal." She took a deep breath. Her voice didn't shake. "I saved a man because he was bleeding. Not because he had papers. Not because he was rich. I saved him because that's what a nurse is supposed to do." The crowd clapped, but she wasn't finished. "When I was fired, they didn't just take my job. They tried to take my dignity. They wanted to scare every other nurse into silence. But I'm here to say, I'm not afraid, and you shouldn't be either." Reporters yelled questions, but Kayla looked straight into the camera. "To every nurse watching this, to every patient who was ever turned away, I see you, I believe you, and I'm standing for you." The clip went viral within hours. Social media exploded. Nurses from around the world began posting pictures with the hashtag #ISavedThem2. Stories poured in, of denied care, of rules that hurt instead of helped, of black and brown patients treated like numbers instead of lives. And in a twist no one saw coming, Vincent Langston himself broke his silence. In a televised statement from his penthouse recovery suite, he sat in a wheelchair, bandages still fresh, voice slow but steady. "I walked into that hospital and nearly died," he began, "not because of my injuries, but because a system decided I wasn't worth saving." He paused, looked directly into the lens. One woman, one nurse, went against all that, and because of her, I'm alive. Because of her, I'm choosing to use every resource I have to fight for change. The next day, Langston Medical announced a $25 million donation to build a national training program for medical staff focused on anti-bias care and ethical emergency response. They named it the Kayla Initiative. St. Bradford's board removed Whitmore within 72 hours. Fired. No pension. No severance. Tiffany Blake resigned under public pressure. And Kayla? She didn't return to St. Bradford. She chose something bigger. With Elijah and a coalition of former patients, doctors, and nurses, she launched a nonprofit, Hands First, dedicated to protecting healthcare workers who speak up and ensuring no patient is ever denied care based on money, race, or paperwork. Her first project? A mobile medical unit that visits underfunded neighborhoods. Free care, no questions asked. And the nurse leading the charge? Still Kayla, still calm, still fierce, and still refusing to let silence win. If this part of her story moved you, smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who believes in standing up when it matters most. Because this isn't the end, it's a beginning. One voice can shake a building, but thousands? They can shake the world. Months had passed since the day Kayla was fired in front of her peers. The weather had changed, the headlines had faded, but the movement she sparked? It didn't slow down. If anything, it roared. Across cities, towns, and even countries, people who had once been invisible began to stand in the light. Nurses wrote letters, patients shared stories, hospital boards who once operated in silence started facing questions they couldn't dodge anymore. Kayla didn't plan to become a symbol. She just wanted to save a life. But now she was something more. A voice for those too tired, too scared, or too broken to speak. Inside her tiny office at the new Hands First Foundation, she sat with a pile of letters. Some were from nurses fired for speaking up. Others were from children who watched their parents suffer in emergency rooms without care. And then there were the personal ones. One card, handwritten in shaky letters, read, "Miss Kayla, thank you for not letting them forget my mama. Isaiah, age 9. Kayla held that card to her chest. It wasn't just a card. It was a reason. Outside, the mobile medical unit she helped launch was preparing for its 10th trip. Free blood pressure checks, mental health screenings, clean bandages, real help. No insurance needed, no shame handed out. Just care, real, human, honest care. Elijah walked in, smiling. "It's happening," he said. "You're making the world remember what it means to heal with your hands and your heart." Kayla smiled back, tired but proud. "We're just getting started." At that very moment, a new policy was being discussed at the state capitol. Kayla's Law. A bill that would protect medical staff who provided emergency care without checking for insurance or immigration status. It was a simple bill, but it meant everything. Because what nearly destroyed Kayla wasn't just one bad man in a suit. It was a rule book built to protect money, not people. And now, lawmakers were forced to read that rule book aloud and rewrite it with the world watching. The hearing was packed. Cameras, reporters, even medical students lined the back walls, notebooks ready, hearts racing. Kayla sat in the front row. When her name was called, she stood. Not in fear, in truth. 5 months ago, she began, I lost my job for doing what I was trained to do, save a life. Not because he had the right paperwork, not because he could pay, but because he was bleeding on the floor and nobody else moved. She paused. A pin could drop. That man turned out to be a billionaire, but it shouldn't have taken that to prove I was right. It shouldn't take money or media attention for compassion to be respected. She looked at every senator in the room. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. And if you don't pass this bill, if you don't protect the people who risk their careers to do what's right, then you're saying that doing nothing is better than trying, and that's a system built to fail. Silence. Then claps, not polite applause. Real, powerful claps, hands slamming together with urgency. Kayla stepped back, heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had said what needed to be said, and people listened. The bill passed its first reading that day. Back in her neighborhood, things had changed too. The same corner store where people once avoided eye contact with her now had her photo in the window. We stand with Nurse Kayla. Even the school where she had once been the quiet girl in the back of the class had invited her to speak. The students sat in silence as she shared her story, not to scare them, but to show them what courage looked like, what it meant to stand when standing meant losing everything. She looked out at them and said something she wished someone had told her long ago. You don't have to be famous to matter. You just have to care enough not to stay silent. The crowd erupted, and just when Kayla thought she had seen it all. One afternoon, 2 helicopters landed again. Not in her yard this time, but in front of City Hall. Out stepped Vincent Langston, fully recovered, walking slowly but steady. He walked straight to Kayla, and in front of the entire press he said, "I used to think saving lives meant investing in hospitals. Now I know it starts with investing in people like her." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a check, $10 million, to expand her foundation. No conditions, no contracts, just belief. Kayla wept, not for the money, but for what it meant. She looked at the crowd and said, "I don't want to be a hero. I just want to live in a world where kindness doesn't cost you your job, where saving a life is never punished." And that's exactly the world she began building. Today, Kayla travels across the country speaking to nursing students, visiting hospitals, helping them build better systems rooted in equity, honesty, and heart. And every time she speaks, she ends the same way. When they try to shame you, stand taller. When they try to silence you, speak louder. When they try to break you, build something they can never destroy. Her book, Hands First, became a bestseller. Her story was turned into a film, but none of it changed her heart. She still wears her white coat. She still holds her grandmother's prayer card in her pocket. And she still smiles at every patient like they matter, because to her they do. If Kayla's story meant something to you, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it, subscribe to our channel, and more than anything, never forget this. The world doesn't change because of titles or power. It changes because of one quiet act of courage that refuses to be ignored.